Okay, so hello again, and in today's section, what I want to talk to you about is Firebase. Now, you may have come across this already, but what we'll do is we'll kind of break it down over the next couple of weeks. So today, I'll just cover a quick overview of Firebase, quick introductory stuff. I will then, when we work it into the labs as well, we'll introduce Firebase authentication. And then we'll bring in Firebase database and some storage, okay? And we might actually finish off with some Google sign-in as well, and there's a thing called the Firebase UI, which I'll talk about in later sections. But generally, what Firebase is kind of made up of is stuff like the following. We have our that's what we'll be looking at: authentication. We'll be looking at real-time database. There's other sections there dealing with dynamic links. There's a whole analytics side of things that will be useful to you. You can look at crash reporting. There's this section called Test Lab that actually remotely test your apps and all the rest of it. But what we'll be looking at, as I said, would be the real-time database, our authentication, storage, and we kind of tied in with donation along the way. Okay, so as I said, we'll be looking at, in this particular section, we'll just talk a little bit about the history, bring in and talk about Firebase, and then over the rest of the sections, we'll just talk about what I would have highlighted there for you. Okay, so a bit of history first. So originally, Firebase was an online chat messaging integration service. Later, the real-time architecture was separated to create Firebase database, just a database part on its own, back in 2012. Maybe you've heard of parse.com. I would have used it myself a while ago when it was active, but Firebase surfaced as a popular choice when parse went down, just kind of disappeared really. Google got involved there. Google acquired Firebase in 2014 and added a whole lot of features in Google I/O 2016 and continued to add features. I suppose that's the big thing about it. So now it's a complete BAA system, or a Backend as a service solution. Maybe you've heard that, kind of come across that acronym before. So it's really, really useful. So to talk a little bit about Firebase itself, again, we just kind of skim the surface, and we look at then in later sections the specific kind of main sections like the real-time database, authentication, all the rest of it. We'll do that later on. So just to talk about what is it, because people may have different kind of ideas about what Firebase is. So kind of just posing some questions here. Is it a cloud database? Is it another name for a Google App Engine? Is it some kind of platform, a cross-platform solution that could be useful for you? Is it just another name for Google Cloud Messaging, right? Does it just deal with analytics? Is it just a virtual private server? So basically, what is it? Okay, so what it is, and again, taking some of this from the official developer docs, it's a complete BAA or Backend as a service solution that includes, just go back to that for a second, right? Your real-time JSON database. That's really nice. And what I found very useful here is that if you've gone off and you've built some kind of service with a JSON backend, there's not a huge change across if you wanted to port your app and swap out the backend, possibly MongoDB backend that is JSON based, and bring in Firebase. Okay, it supports authentication, and again, that's what we'll be looking at in one of our labs. Supports cloud storage, cloud messaging, crash reporting, analytics, and there's a hell of a lot more, as I would have said. So like, we just highlight some of them there. Look, we actually have our hosting. There's a whole test lab is really nice. We've got our app indexing. You can actually remotely configure your apps and push out new versions and all the rest of it, especially when you're testing. There's the whole ad section to it, if you want to monetize your apps and all the rest of it. Okay, so it's pretty impressive back-end service at the moment. In terms of some of the products, you can see them here. As I said, the main ones will be like, there's machine learning. There's a nice one. We'll be focusing on kind of the authentication, cloud storage, real-time database. Obviously not the hosting, but again, I've done it myself. It's very, very straightforward. If you want to push a web app and deploy it to Firebase, basically you download the command line, the CLI, and you'll have it done in 5 minutes. It's really, really nice. But look, a load of other stuff there. Look, your Google Analytics if you want. There's as we said, our cloud messaging, our remote config, and again, that's like the highlights. There's a lot more there as well that they continue to add to. Okay, So you might ask yourself the question, why use Firebase? Maybe you have your Mongo backend working fine, all the rest of it's doing what you need to do. So why would you want to use Firebase? Okay, so the kind of the use case, or the kind of the idea I'm coming at here is that, so we say you have an idea for an app, and what people think is, create an Android app. What's the big deal? Sure, it's just a couple of screens. This thing that runs on your device, and you click a few buttons and up it pops and all the rest of it, right? We obviously know there's a hell of a lot more to it. Okay, in reality, you're probably looking at, do you want to run it on? Is it going to be Android? Is it going to be iOS? Is it going to what devices do you want to run it on? You're going to have to use Cordova or something else maybe to port it across if it's an Android app. You probably need some kind of a web app to back it up. And support any kind of cloud service at all. If you want any kind of multi-user support, you're probably going to need some kind of a web app there to have some web presence to promote your app maybe, and that will tie into its overall backend. Okay, so there's a lot of extra stuff there that the user of the app never actually sees, right? From a developer's perspective, there's a hell of a lot more going on. Okay, in reality, it's a lot to learn. It's a lot of code, a lot of concerns, right? A lot of resources that you have to deal with. A lot of maintenance, and the most dangerous of all, a lot of unknowns. Okay, and then you have all this kind of stuff. So what about your infrastructure? What about scalability? Okay, the whole security side of things. Your reporting, your analytics and testing, and then authentication is a big one at the moment. We'll look at it in more detail, but basically every app now, if it's any decent at all, will have some kind of authentication in it. Whether it's basic, your email password, whether it's Google sign in, Facebook sign in, whatever, all of these make up that this idea for an app that you might have. So like all that makes up stuff that the end user, or the user, the customer may not ever consider, ever see. They just expect it to be there. Okay, and that's where Firebase comes in. That will provide a lot of this out of the box for you. You just do some minimal configuration and it'll all be set up for you. So the first one we're going to look at in the next section will be authentication. And what we will do is, once we can authenticate users, right, so there's our authentication, we will then move across to and use our real-time database to store our donations. Okay, so to begin with the next section, we will authenticate against Firebase, but we will still continue to store these on our node server, and then we will in the following lab we will port across and just have full use Firebase as the full backend service, and kind of remove the node stuff altogether. Okay, I think that's it. Just a small introduction. There's our very important links for the moment. There's the official docs themselves, kind of for your Firebase setup, and what we will be using a lot, and you will be using in the labs, is the console, the Firebase console, so that we will access that, set up a project, and then go from there. Okay, so that's all the stuff we will cover in the next section. Okay, so as I say, small little very brief introduction to Firebase, but we will talk about it and kind of come back to some of these concepts and points later on in the rest of the section. So thanks for listening, and goodbye.